Hey everybody, I'm Dan Murrell here with my review of Ford versus Ferrari, which is hitting theaters everywhere, or at least in North America, next week. It's been spending the last couple months doing the laps of the festival circuits, but now it's hitting nationwide theaters. Directed by James Mangold, starring Matt Damon as Carroll Shelby and Christian Bale as Ken Miles, as they struggle to make a Ford automobile that can beat Ferrari at the 24 Hours of Le Mans race in the mid-60s. Yes, this is a period piece. It's also a racing movie. It's also kind of a buddy movie. It's also a drama. It's also a comedy. And luckily, it works equally as well in all of these categories. It's weird to say that a studio movie is a throwback, but this is kind of a throwback to a big budget studio film that's not based on pre-existing IP or, a big necessarily tentpole spectacular. It's just a talented filmmaker like James Mangold being given a lot of money to realize this vision, the story of these two men and their teams and their families as they do what is considered to be an impossible task, which is to take down Ferrari, which at that time, particularly in a race like 24 Hours of Le Mans, which is an auto race that takes place over 24 consecutive hours. Ferrari absolutely, utterly dominated that competition. Henry Ford II, who was played in this film by Tracy Letts, in a really good performance. Tracy Letts is not a household name. It would have been easy for them to probably go and cast a big name star in this role, but Tracy Letts is really strong in this role. It's a small role, but in context of the bigger film, but he looms over the entire movie. It's really about ego. It's about making a statement. It's about planting your flag and saying, this is what I can do. And as is often exploited by people, it's about Henry Ford II stepping out from under the shadow of the man who revolutionized the world in many ways, Henry Ford, with Ford Motors, with the assembly line, the Model T, and everything else. Shelby and Miles, in their own ways, are also trying to make their marks in the world, to realize dreams that had been dashed. Carroll Shelby is a former winner of the 24 Hours of Le Mans race, as played by Matt Damon, who can no longer drive. Ken Miles is a hotshot driver whose temper has gotten him in trouble, who maybe could have been bigger than he is, but who is kind of standing in his own way as his own worst enemy in many ways. And it's about how this group of people comes together to try to do the impossible. And if you're a gearhead, I think you're really going to love this movie, because it is all about cars, and the cars in this movie are beautiful and they are fast. I mentioned that this is a big budget studio movie, and that budget was put to good use. And I think that James Mangold has pulled off a great feat in that, as a viewer watching the film, I could not always tell, probably 90% of the time, what parts of the film were practical, what parts of the film were used doing CG. James Mangold has talked about the fact that this is a period piece, that Le Mans as it is in this film does not exist in that way anymore. And so a lot of this movie was done practically, shot around the world on different pieces of racetrack. But a lot of this movie is also CG. I couldn't tell you exactly which is which, and that's great. That's how the tools, I think, should be used. You use the computer graphics to supplement what you're able to get in camera. This film does a great job of it. It's about a 2.5 hour long film, but it doesn't feel its length, because it really keeps you glued to the edge of your seat as you watch Shelby and Miles perfect this car, build this Ford into an absolute machine. There are obviously setbacks along the way, as there are in stories like this, and as there were in real life. And then the last hour or so of the film is at Le Mans, as you're in the car oftentimes during the race, as you see how the race ebbs and flows, and it is such spectacular and exciting filmmaking. It could have fallen flat. We've seen racing movies before. Ron Howard made what I think is actually a very underrated one with Rush, but that didn't necessarily connect with audiences. It was sort of a similar story. It's Formula One racing. It wasn't exactly the same as this film, but this does not feel like it's treading ground that's been done before, even by films like Rush, which I think is an excellent film. It feels fresh. It feels original. A lot of that is on the backs of Matt Damon and Christian Bale. They carry the weight of most of this film. They're both, we know that they're both great actors, and they both approach their roles in different ways. I will say that I think that Christian Bale is the standout only because his role as Ken Miles is the more showy role. He's the one who gets to show the flashes of anger. He gets to show more of the humor of the situation. You know, he's an impetuous soul who sort of struggles against being restrained and contained and isn't at his best. He's at his best when you let him loose and let him figure things out. So Christian Bale gets a little more of the meatier stuff, but Matt Damon is also great there as the center of the film, really holding things down, keeping this project on track. And you feel the weight, the burden, not just of the Ford Motor Company, but in some ways of the nation on his shoulders. This was not a task that was thought to be possible at this time, nor was it an easy task. And this film, Ford versus Ferrari, really takes that story on in an entertaining way, in an informational way. I was not really aware of anything around the real life circumstances of what happens in the movie and also what happens with all of the characters. So this was educational for me. I also just loved it as a movie. I think if you go find a big screen with a great sound system, this is going to be a really impressive film. But I think it's an impressive film in any setting, although it is very cinematic. James Mangold has done a great job of being immersive with the racing scenes. I think this is a movie that you're really going to enjoy. And James Mangold, if you look at his filmography, movies that have included Copland and Logan, Walk the Line, which won Reese Witherspoon an Oscar, 3:10 to Yuma, which I think was a great Western film starring Russell Crowe, Girl Interrupted, which won Angelina Jolie an Oscar. James Mangold may be one of the most underrated directors working today because he keeps putting out quality pieces of entertainment, sometimes big budget studio films, sometimes lower budget films, as I mentioned, like with Copland earlier in his career. As with any filmmaker, there have been ups and downs, but I think when you look in totality at James Mangold's career, he's sneakily becoming one of the most consistent and best directors working today. And I think he delivered again with this film. It's a big recommendation for Ford versus Ferrari for me. Go have a good time, find a great big screen. If it's on an IMAX screen, a great sound system, and enjoy the ride, because I know I sure did. Thanks for watching this review of Ford versus Ferrari. We'll be back next week with even more reviews of the big studio releases and some of the smaller films that are going to be making their way out soon for awards contention. Thanks for watching. See you next time.